thrilled that you're joining us today to spotlight one of our incredible female leaders, Rebecca Lundy. Rebecca is the General Manager of Operations at ACT Ambulance Service and has dedicated more than 30 years to the service. She started her journey as a paramedic, working her way up through the ranks, and now leads frontline paramedics to drive strategic planning and shape the future of ACT Ambulance Service. We are so proud to have Rebecca join us today, sharing her leadership journey as part of our Women in Leadership webinar series. Now, a couple of quick housekeeping notes before we begin. The session you're about to see is a recorded live session from our Women in Leadership Symposium that was held in November last year. Rebecca is here with us live today and will be answering your questions after the recording. So I'm going to have a bit of Q&A with her for 10 to 15 minutes after the recording is done. So please feel free to type in any comments or questions for Beck in the side note you'll see in the chat. And thank you again for joining us. Enjoy the session, and I'll see you soon after the session for a live Q&A with Rebecca.
Rebecca Lundy, who is the General Manager of Operations at ACT. Remarkable career with the ACT Ambulance Service, joining at the age of 20, just last week. She became an intensive care paramedic in 1997, spent several years as a training and development officer. In 2004, Rebecca transitioned to the communication centres, where she contributed significantly to education and training for a decade, focusing on 000 call taking and dispatch training. In 2014, she moved into operations management, initially managing the communication centre before overseeing all frontline paramedic staff. From 2017, she acted as the chief officer role on several occasions and began serving as general manager of operations in 2020, a position that she has now secured permanently this year. Congratulations. And outside of her professional achievements, Rebecca is proud of her blended family of 4 children and enjoys spending weekends supporting them in netball, hockey and rugby league, as well as playing competitive softball when her knees allow it. Please welcome Rebecca to the stage.
Okay, good morning. This is only mildly terrifying, so just bear with me for a sec. Before I start, I would like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional lands of the Wangal people today. I live and work on the traditional lands of the Ngunnawal people, which is the ACT. I'd like to acknowledge the continuing connection that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have to country, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So this is an artwork that was commissioned by ACT Ambulance Service. It came through the engagement of one of our ambulance managers, Nicola, who is here today. It's a beautiful piece of art, connections in relationship and healing. We're so taken with this. It's in all of our ambulance facilities. It's on the side of one of our Cat 1 emergency vehicles, and we've had it put on our epaulets, and it's now a standard part of our uniform issue. And our staff can choose to wear those, and when we do, we wear them with pride in recognition of connection. Okay, so the brief I was given today was just tell your story. Now, my story in ambulance is 30 years long, so I'm not going to bore you with a continuous or chronological year after year kind of presentation. So what I thought I'd do is I'm going to tell you a bit of a story. So brace yourselves, there's no academic research in this presentation, and I'm a very informal person. And I do warn you, I might get a little bit sweary as we go. It just slips out. I don't mean it to be offensive, but it happens when I tell stories. So let's just pretend that you and I are sitting in a bar or a cafe sharing a drink, and we're going to have a yarn. All right. So what I am going to do is I will tell you a little bit about how I got from there to here. I'll give you a fast forward for the first sort of 2/3 of my career. I'll tell you some stuff that happened sort of on the way, both at work and at home. And then I'm going to tell you a story which happened in the last 10 years of my career, which I hope is relevant to our theme of leadership today. And I'll finish up by telling you what's happened since then and a couple of things that I wish someone had told me a long time ago. So, without further ado, today I'm going to tell you about the job that I didn't get and what happened next. All right. So I never wanted to be an AMBO. It wasn't a thing, right? My dad was a copper when I grew up, so I knew there were such things as emergency services. But when you were born in 1974 and you turn 50 this year, and you know who you are out there, represent, right? Being a paramedic was not an automatic career choice. It wasn't a common thing. I left school in 1991. I come from a very large family of humanitarians, and most of the adults in my family have jobs that are in service to people or for people. There's a lot of military service in my family, there's some teachers in my family, and even the solicitors in my family are on the good side. But I had always had an affinity with teaching and education. I quite liked the idea, so it was a safe choice, it was a common choice, it was an easy choice. I was going to be a teacher when I left school. And then I turned 16, and I have a 16-year-old daughter at the moment, and 16 is a great age, isn't it? Because you realise there's a world beyond your bedroom door. The washing doesn't do itself, and things like your grandparents actually being people before they were your grandparents, like this occurs to you. And I realised at 16 that I knew nothing about what my grandparents had done before they were my grandparents, so I set about finding out. So this is my nan, right? And my nan, rather conveniently, was named Nancy, so she was nan to everyone, not just us grandkids. And Nan told me that she studied as a mothercraft nurse in Melbourne in the 1930s, and this led her to mental health nursing in Melbourne and Sydney in asylums and institutes during the 1930s, before she left nursing and married my pa in 1939 and became a Presbyterian's wife, mother and grandmother. Now, this was the first time that I became aware that anybody in my family had done something in the sort of medical nursing health field. And something in the back of my head went, oh, I don't mind the sound of that. And then I went to talk to my other grandparents, and this is my grandpa Walter. Now, Grandpa enlisted in the Royal Australian Navy during the Second World War. He spent his entire service on the HMAS Manoora, which was the role of the Manoora in the Pacific Campaign was to take Australian troops, it was a troop ship, to the islands like Borneo, Mojca and Balikpapan, and launched the troops onto the beach, and they forged off into the jungle, and off they went. Now, my grandfather's rank in the Navy was sick berth attendant, right? It's a rank that doesn't exist anymore. It's a bit like the precursor to a military medic, right? So what his job was to follow or go with the troops onto the beach. He'd set up a casualty clearing station, and he'd patch them all up as they came back from the jungle. And those that were a bit too sort of wounded for his care at the jungle, he would escort them back to the Manoora, where he would then assist the naval surgeon in the operating theatre aboard the ship. So, this is the second time I find out that somebody in my family has done something in this health, medical, nursing field. And I thought, this is a better fit for me. So I wasn't smart enough to be a doctor, so nursing it was. Now, it turns out that in year 11 and 12, if you don't go to all your classes and you don't put your best effort in, it can severely hamper your ability to gain a place at university. And this is what happened to me. So I wandered about despondently for a bit until I was sitting at home one Saturday with my grandpa, this one, and he was reading the Saturday paper, because back then job ads were in the paper, and he goes, oh, look at this. He said, the ACT Ambulance Service is looking for ambulance officers. Why don't you do that? So, on the 16th of May, 1994, I turned up for my very first day in the ambulance service, and I had not long turned 20, as you heard. Now, the chap with me in this photo you might recognise. This is my current chief officer, Howard Wren. Hi, Howard. I've had the privilege of serving my entire career with Howard. Back then, he was the grand high poobah of all things clinical education. And this group of people here to your right, the crazy individuals that joined the job with me, we had a fairly extraordinary experience, the six of us. So the chap on the far end was an educator. But the six of us stayed in ambulance for our entire careers. We made it to 25 years together. 3 of us have retired in the last 5 years. But myself, Jenny, the blonde, and the giant fellow at the back with the wingnut ears, Matthew, we still are in ambulance. Jenny works for Queensland, Maddie's in AV, and of course I'm here. And Jenny and Kirsten and I were women 8, 9 and 10 in the ACT ambulance service. So, my career does neatly divide itself into its 3 decades. The first 10 years I was an intensive care paramedic on the road, and I loved it. Full-time shift work, right? This was my place in the universe. This is what I was meant to do, right? Super happy. And at some point, not long after I qualified, they asked me to work with some students. So I said, sure, I can do that. Then I got asked to train in the ComCen at the 10-year mark. I said, sure, I can do that. And then they asked me to continue training and roll out the entire vet sector program for call takers and dispatchers. I said, sure, I can do that. And by the time my 20th year came about, I was the Communications Centre Education Officer for ACTAS. Nowadays, the frontline supervision shift commander position for ACTAS is called the duty officer, right? And when we onboard new DOs now, I sort of stand in front of them and I give this sort of little presentation thing. But I describe my career like this. I say that I am a paramedic by trade, right? I'm an educator at heart, and now I'm a leader by choice, right? And the choice thing is key, and I'm going to park it there, but we'll circle back to it shortly. All right, so there were a few other things that happened to me in those middle 10 years between 2004 and 2014. In 2008, my then partner and I had our first daughter, Eliza, that's her. She's the 16-year-old, so she's not nearly as cute anymore. And then we had our second child, Virginia, in 2010. Now, Virginia was born quite early in 2010, and by the time she was 6 months old, we decided to separate. So I found myself full-time, single mum, shift working predominantly, with 2 kids under the age of 3, and carefully trying to negotiate the minefield that is co-parenting. Now, I didn't give birth to my children. They're biologically my children, but my partner gave birth to them. And so at the time, I didn't think that I could access a flexible work arrangement. I didn't think it was for me. So I continued to work full-time, did some crazy things, right? 14-hour night shift, go home, look after your kids, have a nap when they nap, get up, go do your other 14-hour night shift. Anyway. So by the time 2014 came around, I had repartnered to someone who I'm still with today, and things had settled down, life was good. And then one day, our Deputy Chief Officer said, hey, we've got this hole in the operations management team. Would you want to move sideways and just manage the ComCen work group for a bit? And again, I said, sure. I had no management training whatsoever. There was no manual on how to be an ops manager, and no one was talking about this thing called leadership, right? So the ACTAS operations management team in 2014 looked like this. There was a male general manager at the top. There were 5 operations managers, 2 of whom were female, 1 of whom was me. And we had 6 duty officers report through to us, all of whom were men. We were all white, with one exception. One of our duty officers is a man of colour, and that was as diverse as we got. Now, I got into this team and I quickly discovered, that the culture was a bit, right? It was quite toxic, it was nasty and blamey, which kind of rubbed me the wrong way, because being a paramedic and an educator, that was not my thing. The best example I can give you of the culture in the team at the time is this. Every Monday morning, the operations management team had a meeting, its weekly meeting. It was run by the general manager. All of the operations managers attended, as did the duty officer of the day. And I quickly realised that these meetings were an opportunity for all of the things that were bad in operations the following week to be dissected and essentially blame the DO for everything that had gone wrong. And what was even more cruel was that we hadn't really given the duty officers a lot of tools to do their jobs, right? It got so bad that the DOs referred to these meetings as Pinata Monday, and they stopped coming. What was worse was that no one did anything to fix it. Right. So, where am I up to? this continued on for a little bit, and we got a new chief officer, right? We had an ESA-wide restructure around this time. They took away our deputy chief officer positions, both from us and from fire and rescue. So we were in a bit of a fluxy time. And I had decided just to hunker down, keep my head below the trench and just try and do my own thing, figuring out how to be an ops manager for the ComSen work group. And I discovered I quite liked it. And I must have been doing something okay, because the new chief officer, who'd busied himself coming around figuring out how our service worked, asked me, hey, do you want to move over and manage the emergency portfolio for a bit? I said, sure. And you heard, that's all the paramedics and all 6 duty officers reporting up through to one person. It was the biggest and the busiest portfolio in the ops team. And I really didn't know how to help them, the DOs, so I just decided to mum them a little bit. And I listened to them and I took them for coffee, and particularly as I was only acting in the team, right? How far do you invest when you're acting in a position? At any rate, I sort of forged my way around, and I listened to them, and I tried to give them some tools to do their job. And then suddenly, a permanent job as an ops manager came up, and everybody thought the job was mine. All right, so no spoiler alert here. This is the story, the title story, right? So you know how it's going to end. But I'm going to tell you anyway, because it's not about the destination, it's about the journey, right? So I went into this recruitment process hard. It was the first time in my career that I actually wanted a job rather than being asked to do something. So I wrote a strong application. I thought I nailed the interview. The general manager was the panel chair. There was another chap on the panel and an independent female. And I was pulled into a meeting room after the recruitment process, and the GM said to me, like, don't even, good morning, how are you, nothing. Just, we sat down in this meeting room and he says, you didn't get the job. Now, I pride myself on having a bit of a poker face, but clearly not that day, because he then tried to fill the awkward silence by saying, well, if I'd had 2 jobs to give out, I would have given you a job, but I don't. I've just got 1 job and you didn't get the job. So somehow I found the wherewithal to ask for a feedback session. We agreed on a later date, and that was that. And I didn't understand where I'd gone wrong, right? And why I hadn't been able to win the position. Now, the job went to a man. His name was Mark. But rather annoyingly, Mark was lovely, and actually he and I got on very well. And he kind of did things the same way that I did, so I couldn't even hate him for taking my job. But I stayed in the operations management team because another manager had been seconded elsewhere. And it became quite difficult for me to figure out where I'd gone wrong when they kept me in the emergency portfolio. The biggest and busiest one. So that was really tricky to reconcile. If I wasn't good enough to win the job, why was I good enough to stay in this portfolio? Anyway, I had pinned all my hopes on my feedback session, right, from the general manager. This was the opportunity I was going to get to figure out where I'd gone wrong, what had happened, why I didn't get the job. And we went into the same meeting room. He sat down. No, hi, how are you? No, nothing like that. And this is exactly what happened, right? Because I have never forgotten this. He sits down in the chair. He leans back. He folds his arms and says, well, I reckon I've learned more from you than you've learned from me, so I actually don't have any feedback for you. And at that point, I realised it was a fairly lost cause, so I said, thank you very much, and I left the room. And then I went down the rabbit hole. I questioned my skill set. I questioned what was I doing here. I couldn't figure out why I hadn't got a job. I thought maybe I should just go back to education. That was safe. I could do that with my eyes closed. Maybe I should give this Monday to Friday management gig away and just go back to the road and be a paramedic, because that's ultimately what I had joined the job to do. So looking after one patient at a time was a lot of an easier concept than trying to look after nearly 200 paramedics and 6 duty officers. So one day, though, I was sitting at my desk and an email popped into the inbox, and it went to all senior and middle managers, right? And you might remember that they took our DCO position off us. So this email was an expression of interest, looking for suitably qualified and experienced senior or middle managers to put themselves forward to be considered to act as the chief officer or take on the delegation of the chief officer, in the event that the chief was on holidays, fell off the back of a ute, Howard, I'm looking at you, or, disappeared with the royal family in a plane. I read it and I deleted it, right? It was not for me. I was still the education officer for ComSen. A day or two later, I was sitting at my desk. We have an open office environment in our headquarters building, so I could see him coming. The general manager comes over to me, right, my boss, and he goes, "Did you see the email?" And I went, "What email?" He said, "The email about the expression of interest." I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Well, I was having a think. Maybe it's a good professional development for you to write an EOI and put it in." Now, in my head, I said, "I can't crack a job as an ops manager in your team and you think this is okay?" But I smiled and said, "Oh, thanks, I'll consider it." Now, I went home that night and I was fairly outraged, right? And I had a really great venting session to my partner. Now, my partner is an extraordinary female leader in her own right, and I learned stuff from her all the time. And she listened to me rant and rant, "How unfair, how dare he, rah." And then when I'd finally finished, she said, "Have you finished?" And I said, "Yes." She goes, "You'd be mad not to." Right. So I slept on it, and mostly out of spite. I wrote an expression of interest the next day, and I then thought nothing of it, right? Nothing more. Just sent it and thought, ha. Our new chief officer left around this time quite suddenly. Again, we were put into a bit of a flux in terms of our management structure, and Howard was thrust into the interim chief's position while the search for a new chief went on, and we felt fairly settled. Howard was like a comfy pair of slippers. We knew him, it was all good. And then one day I was sitting at my desk, again, open office environment, and the then Commissioner of the Emergency Services Agency, who was Dominic Lane at the time, come walking over, and I thought, I think he's coming to my desk. And he did, and he come right up to my desk. He goes, "Beck." I said, "Dom." He said, "Follow me." And I had that moment where you go, do I pack all my shit into a cardboard box because I'm being marched out to the car park? But I thought, no, I'll follow him. Followed him back to his office. There's a big conference table in his office, and Howard's sitting at the conference table. There's a few other ESA executives sitting there and some other people who clearly were very important, and I had no idea who they was. Dominic said, "Take a seat." I sat, and I thought, what the f*** am I doing in this room? And clearly they were in the middle of a meeting, right? And so I sat there puzzled until Dominic turned around and said, "So Beck, when Howard's on leave and you're the acting chief officer," and I didn't hear anything else after that because my brain did this. So that was 2017. The job I didn't get, well, what happened next was I became the acting chief officer of the ACT Ambulance Service, right? It is a very scary thing to do, and every time, I've had the pleasure of doing it a few times since then over these last 7 years, and every time I step into that office I think, what the f*** am I doing? I am just a baggy-assed ambo, right, who turns up when someone asks them to do something, so I've got no idea how to run a service. I don't know what I'm doing. I feel a little bit like I'm a fraud. I'm just going to sit in the chair and not break anything while he's away. But when you start working or acting in these positions, people ask you really hard questions. They're difficult questions like, what are your leadership values? What's your leadership style? Tell us about your leadership journey. And I had no idea how to answer any of those questions because I'd never thought about it, right? Never given it any thought. But the following year, in 2018, another life event happened, right? So in the April of that year, my ex-partner, who I'd been co-parenting my kids with, was diagnosed with terminal cancer. It was very aggressive, it was very quick, and by August she was dead. So we had 4 months to prepare our girls for the loss of a parent, right? And without fear or failure, with everything that's happened to me in my personal life and everything that I've seen in my work life, this was and still remains the most difficult thing I've ever had to do, prepare my kids for grief. And I had no reference point to help them. Both my parents are still alive, and I didn't know how to do it. And it was, all I wanted to do as a mum was to protect them from any pain and any hurt, but I knew it was going to be inevitable, right? So I had to figure out, how am I going to give them some tools? How am I going to mitigate this hurt, right? So my kids, like most kids, worked well with routine and structure, right? And rules. Sometimes they followed them, sometimes they didn't. And I worked well with routine and structure. Being a career ambulance person, standard operating procedures, policies, instructions, guidelines. And I thought, okay, maybe I can put something together here. So I figured out, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it, right? So my partner and I sat down with the girls, and this is an actual conversation that we had. We said, moving forward, that we would always be compassionate. In the heart of everything that we did, moving forward from this day, we would care for ourselves and each other, because kindness costs nothing and means everything. We would be honest about our thoughts and feelings, because I can't help you if I don't know what they are. We said we would be patient, because not everybody thinks and feels things at the same time, right? We said we would have empathy, because not everybody thinks and feels the same things as everybody else. We would be consistent, because we needed to be consistent to support each other and know that we would be there for them anytime. And that led to trust, because I had to trust them to tell me what was going on, and they trusted me to be there to support them. And all of that, I hoped, would mean that they became resilient, because I needed them to have tools to do this for themselves and for the rest of their lives, right? For that time period. I didn't know how to help them. I didn't know how to support them and guide them through it. So this was quite the challenge. It was a bumpy road those first couple of years, but we muddled through. The first anniversary, the first birthdays, first Mother's Day is pretty tricky. But it wasn't really until 2020 that I had somewhat of a revelation. The GM Ops, the same GM, was seconded to a different position in the Emergency Services Agency, and Howard asked me to step into the acting general manager role, and he gave me a job to do. He said, grow the operations management team, make it a diverse team which represents the ACTAS staff better, and change the culture. Right? What do you reckon I said? Sure, right? This was 5 months into the COVID pandemic, and us day workers had gone home, right, in lockdown. We were working from home, as were our kids. And for me, this was the first time that my work self and my parent self had coincided, and I had to do both of them at the same time, which I found quite challenging. There was no separation between that. And by this time, spent many years acting. So I want to say probably, if that was 2020, I've spent 5 of the last 6 years in acting positions to that point. And I'd often had a reluctance to really get my teeth into a job, because it always came with the caveat that the job wasn't really mine. And I was still struggling to answer the leadership values question. What's your leadership values? What's your style? What's your journey? And I was just trying to look after all of these jobs that belonged to other people, again, without trying to break anything while they were there, just trying to keep the seat warm, right? And it was really tricky this time to figure out how I was going to do this job, because it was quite a big one, and I felt like there was a lot at stake. And I was particularly challenged by trying to figure out how to do it, knowing that I could be moved back to my substantive role at any time. And, you know, doing it in the middle of a COVID pandemic when we were reactive, right? Every day the guidelines were changing, PPE requirements were changing, infection control policies were changing. And I struggled to ask my people to follow me with the vision, but having to always give them the caveat of, oh, I might not be here to see it through. So that was tricky. And so I had a light bulb moment this one day at home. with my kids who were at home. And I was jumping from meeting to meeting, and in my lounge room, that's where my office was set up. And I was helping Virginia with her Year 5 maths problem that I completely didn't understand. And Eliza was losing her mind over a science project in Year 7, and then it all sort of clicked into place, right? I had leaned in and showed up for my kids when they needed me the most, and this is what I now needed to do at work, right? And I understood that the person who I was, compassion, honesty, patience, empathy, trust, resilience, these are my values, right? This is my style, this is who I am, and now I understood that I needed to choose to lead. I needed to bring that to work, and I needed to do that every day. Because leadership isn't a passive thing, right? You've got to be conscious, you've got to be active, and you've got to be intent with what you do. And particularly if you're going to show up and do your best for the people that you have accountability and responsibility for, right? You've got to work at your leadership every single day, leading yourself, leading your peers, leading your teams, and leading the service. And for the ACTAS people in the audience, what's that? Our leadership framework. That's exactly right. Thank you for playing. So I felt like a weight had lifted because I'd finally found my values and my style. They were there all along, right? They were there all along. Now, the last 4 years have seen quite the transformation in me and in my ops team. We've been reimagined, we've rebranded, and we've grown the team together as a team. And on the 16th of May this year, which was exactly my 30th anniversary to the day, I got a phone call from Howard, my chief, and he told me that I had earned the job of General Manager of Operations in my own right on merit. So it's still weird, like that was only 6 months ago, right? That's still a weird thing to try and wrap my head around. But in terms of the operations management team, like I said, we've gone through a bit of a reimagination, and now we're just the ops team, and we look like this. Right, there are 16 of us up there, and if you do the count, there's a 50-50 gender split. There are people in this team who identify as belonging to the LGBTIQ+ community. There are people in this team who are culturally and linguistically diverse. There are people in this team who practice Christian and non-Christian religions, and we even have representation of those with neurodiversity. So we look like the people that we lead, support and manage in that order. And I couldn't be more proud of the amazing group of people that I get to come to work with every day. Embracing our diversity, we've put our people first, and we've created our own set of shared values as a team. And the buggers surprised me because they wrote a brief to turn up here today, and they're sitting at the table over there, which I was not expecting. I joined this job because I wanted to help people, right? The people were patients at the first part of my career. And whilst my career has been a series of agreeing to do things along the way, I now choose to come to work as a leader because my people are the people of ACTAS. So, you're very patient. I'm getting to the end. I haven't got much more to go. I told you this horrible thing happened to my kids, right? So I kind of wanted to give you a bit of a mum brag and let you know how they're doing now, right? So here we go. So you might remember Eliza and Virginia. The photo in the middle is a selfie that I took on my very first day as acting chief officer with them. I had to duck out, pick them up from school and take them back to a meeting. I made them the general manager of snacks and colouring in, which they quite liked. But here's how they're doing. So Eliza is now 16. She has represented the ACT in sport. Earlier this year, she was the representative for her school at the YWCA She Leads Senior College Conference in Canberra. Next year she enters Year 12, bless her, with a plan to work in aged care. Virginia is now 14 and she has represented the ACT in 2 sports. She was the inaugural recipient of the Community Leadership Award at school this year. And this was her first ever year where she played senior women's hockey, right? So this is full-on field hockey. She's a goalie and she's 14 and she played for an Australian National University team. And at the end of season presentation function last month, they voted her best and fairest for the season. So that's pretty cool. They knew I was going to talk about them today. I said, is it all right if I talk about you? Yes, Mum. Sure, thank you. Thank you. In May of this year, my mum was diagnosed with terminal cancer. She doesn't have much time left, right? And when I sat the girls down to tell them that their nan had terminal cancer, they looked me in the eye and said, "It's okay, Mum, we got you." So I couldn't be more proud of them, right? Oh, big breath. Right, last slide. You've been very patient. So if you remember nothing else about what I've said today, that's cool with me, right? Because there are 3 things. This is the last page of the book, so skip to the end, right? These are the 3 things that I wish someone had talked to me about 10 years ago and told me. Because who knows where I might have ended up if I'd actually had this information and this advice rather than just saying sure. Know who you are, right? Your role as a mum, a wife, an auntie, a sister, a friend, a teammate, a colleague, a clinician, all of these roles define who you are. So know that, right? Just be that, right? If you're not sure who you are, or you pretend to be something you're not, or you're disingenuous in any kind of way, you'll get picked like a nose every single time. So just be you, because you are enough, right? You're enough. The second thing I would share with you is if you find yourself in acting positions like I have, as I said, and in total in the last 10 years, it is 8 of the last 10 years that I have been in acting positions, throw yourself in 100%, right? Don't wait. Don't be passive. Don't just keep the seat warm, right? You may not get another chance to push yourself. You may not get another chance to get out of your comfort zone and grow, and you may not get another chance to show someone what you can do. So like my partner says, drive it like you stole it, right? Lean in, show up and choose to be there. And the final thing that I'll share with you, last year I had the privilege of listening to the extraordinary Erica give us a presentation on Actually I Can, right? Now that resonated with me, but I wasn't quite at that point of self-realisation where I felt that that was a me thing. So I went away and had to think about it, and it wasn't really till I sat down to do this today that I had words to wrap around, I think, where I was best in that space. So imposter syndrome is real, right? I explained to you earlier, every time still, to this day, when I cover Howard, and I did in June, I acted as the chief officer for a period of time while he was on leave. I walked into that office and I sat down and thought, I don't know that I can do this. Why am I here? I'm still, right, baggy-assed Ambo, who just turns up to do things. And even though I have found my leadership styles and my leadership value, it's still the first thought that pops into my head every single time, right? So what I'll say to you is this: when you have that voice in your head that says, I'm not good enough, or I don't have the right qualifications or experience, or I don't think I can, here's the thing, right? You say yes to everything that you're ever asked to do, to every opportunity that comes your way, because the people that are asking you, right, they think you can, right? They think you can. So the antidote to imposter syndrome is to take the leap of faith. So that's it, really. This is in my enduring message for 30 years. I wish someone had told me this stuff years ago. Don't get picked like a nose, drive it like you stole it, and take the leap of faith. That's it, really. Our time's up. Thanks for listening. It's going to be your shout next time. Oh, sure.
I think you've got a bit of a standing ovation.
Hi everyone, we're back and we're gonna kick off our live Q&A with Rebecca. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. It was wonderful seeing it again, and I'll welcome Rebecca to join me now for a couple of questions. And anyone, please drop them into the chat, and we'll go from there. Hi, Beck.
Hi, Mojca, how are you?
I'm not going to ask how bad that was looking back at yourself talking.
Oh, it was to watch, I have to say. Yeah, I picked up a few tips for maybe next time.
I thought you were going to say you picked up some really good tips from your presentation. We did.
Look, yeah, no, it was a pleasure to be there last November in Sydney. It was a really good day, and I certainly got a lot out of it. Thank you for the opportunity.
No, pleasure. And thank you so much for joining us. And but for also for all the support. So, and I'll just a bit of background. I've known Beck for about 8 years now, I want to say, if not longer, but definitely as part of all the work that we're doing at CAA in the Women in Ambulance and Women in Leadership space. And thank you so much for all your support and knowledge and being frank and honest, what works, what doesn't work, and how we can support women going forward. So thank you for that. Cool. Okay, we'll jump into questions. I've got a stash of them, but also there we go. We've got one from Matt. And what do you see the future of leadership in ambulance as of now? So your thoughts maybe on those?
Oh, look, I think the future of leadership in ambulance, it has to be about your people. It has to starting with understanding your workforce and engaging with them, and working through as a transformational leader. That's the kind of approach that I resonate with in trying to get the most out of your people, and improve, find challenges, work together, collaborate, and really invest in your people.
Yeah. Agree. It's really about people, knowing your people, and really looking after them on that individual. And just yesterday we had the Women in Ambulance Forum meeting, and we were talking about that, about personalizing for your people and for them individually as well. Um, there's a question from Chrissy, who is changing her career from nursing to paramedic, and she's saying, "I can do this and do education in the future." But some thoughts, maybe, and some of your thoughts or some advice for somebody changing. You've gone from education, well, first from paramedic, then into education, so
Yep.
on road into education and into operational, and whilst they're all within the same service and that, they're still very different ones. Some pieces of advice in that space?
I think some of the best skills that I developed as an educator have helped me fundamentally in moving into leadership. So being able to engage with people, talk to people, understand how they learn, how they like to receive information, they're very what's the word I'm looking for? They're very
Transferable.
transportable skills. Yeah, transferable skills. So moving between those two worlds, I find can be sort of very beneficial, or at least you've got the skills that you can take across with you. And I think even some of those skills, particularly in the health sector, are transferable between industries. So the transition between nursing and paramedicine, you can use those education and leadership skills as foundation skills, regardless of which branch you're in.
Yeah. Um, I get a lot of these when I'm talking to paramedics and they want to transition into leadership roles, be it team leader or, further down up, I guess, the career pathway. And they say, "Oh, I'm just a paramedic. I don't have leadership skills." And I sort of look at them and go, "You do realize every single day when you're on the road, you're leading a team of people that are the patient, the patient's family, bystanders, your colleagues and stuff like that." Your thoughts on that? Because again, you've been there on the road and then transitioning, those skills.
I think it's really tricky. This is something that I wasn't very sort of across until the more recent years in my career. When we started in the ops manager space, supporting some of our older staff to transition to retirement, and understanding that if they're not doing this frontline role anymore, I don't have any skills to do anything. I've only ever done this. I'm just a paramedic. But understanding that in just being a paramedic comes with it a whole whole vast range of things that are useful in all sorts of other roles and industries and occupations. And we tend not to think more broadly around what those skills can look like, because we've been so focused on that patient care aspect of our roles for so long. And as just as you've said, working with a paramedic partner and a crew of 4 fire officers at the scene of a road accident, there's a whole bunch of team and leadership and communication skills, all sorts of skills that we display there. We just think that that's part of being an AMBO. And whilst that's true, you can move those skills into lots of other roles and occupations.
Yeah. Bit of a no, I don't want to say loaded question or anything like that, but you've gone through these changes and through your career. Any plans maybe to when you're educating or when you're grooming your next sort of future paramedics and that, and trying to give them some of that feedback straight on, so that when they are paramedics on the road, they're not same as what you might have been, and quite a few that are now that are thinking, I'm just a paramedic, I don't have these skills, but sort of starting to implement that into them, and maybe a bit more self-confidence, so they are better fit for the future, or you know
I think we've absolutely got room to explore that in our industry and promoting those sorts of conversations. But what I've come to realize and what I like to acknowledge and what I think is really cool is that this next generation, and I as a ambulance dinosaur, this most recent generation of paramedics that are onboarding with our services are coming with far more broad understanding of their skill set than perhaps I did when I first joined, being a baggy ass ambo. They're highly educated paramedics. They've been given perception and expectations around this role that sit not only in the clinical space, but they're being taught clinical leadership, which is that stepping stone into exploring these other sorts of skills that we will come to recognize, and we want to find and hone in talent management and talent progression with our staff, and understanding where they want to go in their careers. But I think a lot of this is happening sort of organically with these younger generations anyway, which is super cool.
Yeah. And talking generations, you have in your organization everything from people who have been in the role, probably more than you, and older, and then, your sort of within your generation, and then all the generations that are coming behind us. How do you go around leading and engaging all the different generations? Because we hear a lot about it, how they're so vastly
Mhm.
different. But what are some of your thoughts on that?
Again, stuff that I've kind of only really started to understand and try and work through. I am not wanting to be an out of touch dinosaur that just sort of doesn't understand what's happening. There's a couple of things that we've tried to do as a service in the ACT recently. We've established a wellbeing and awareness group, and rather than have it sort of as a representational thing from your work roster team, we're asking for we have representatives from the graduate paramedic cohort, the ambulance paramedic cohort, all different places. We recognise that wellbeing needs and welfare needs are different depending on how you work for us. And the other thing I've done more personally, more recently, is reached out to a couple of our younger, more recently qualified ambulance paramedics, and I've asked them to take me on as a mentor. So so I think it's called reverse mentoring. So these are our younger generation, and I enjoy spending time with them and asking them questions about how do we solve the problems in the service, what there might be a particular challenge that we're facing in operations, what are their thoughts on how we might circumvent that, how can I be more approachable as a general manager of operations. So there's a few bits and pieces that we're starting to sort of try and work with to break down those barriers and to keep me in touch across all work groups and generations.
That's awesome. I love that. We've got a question around the acting, and it was, and
Sure.
you laugh because it was a few years ago. One of our colleagues on the forum said that ambulance services, the sector is like Hollywood because everyone's actors.
Yeah, I love that. It's a good comment, isn't it?
And Rebecca is asking about any specific advice that you might have for those acting in management roles long term, and you're sharing a role when somebody is in it acting, but the other person that you're sharing with is permanent. That'd be a bit of a interesting
Yeah,
situation.
I guess that is an interesting situation, and I kind of guess it depends on the tolerance that you have for driving it like you stole it. And if you're actually sharing a job with somebody else, then you've really got to collaborate with that person. If you're trying, and particularly if it's a leadership or management position, you want to be consistent together. If you're sharing the job, you want to make sure that you are united in your messaging. You can be individuals and choose different words, and but your messaging has to be the same, I think. And it is tricky, long-term acting roles. And like I said, my having learned this way and having gone in down that rabbit hole, you have to invest. You have to jump in at some point. Seat warming is good for short periods of time, but if you end up in positions for a long period of time, you're going to just be stagnant. You got to jump in. You got to give it your all. You've got to try and do the role to its fullest.
And I love how you link that into the fact that people who've asked you to act in that role, or even if you applied for it and got it as an acting, you've applied, you've gone through the process, there was a recruitment panel or somebody handpicked you to put you in that role. So there's people there that know that you can do the job. Like, even if you're questioning yourself, and as women, we know that's just constant. But I love how you tie that into that you just, sometimes you need to trust others that they know that
Yep.
you can do it. Yeah.
Yep. And
Um,
that was the connection with the previous symposium, and Eric is, actually I can. I couldn't, but I found faith in other people's belief.
yeah. Whatever gets us through it, right? Like you
Yeah, right.
just trust the others or trust yourself. So sometimes the others are a bit, you think they're smarter, they know better than we do.
Yeah.
Um, Now, I love that you shared so much about you personally and your family.
Hmm.
How important is that for you in your teams and in the people that you lead, the
Enough.
family and
Uh,
their personal selves?
Look, so my immediate team at the moment, I have 7 in my team, and it's really important. Like your family is one of the biggest indicators of who you are. So if you want to know who your people are, you need to be invested in understanding where they come from, what they go home to every day, and understanding when they need something in their personal life. It's, this is their family dynamic. We support them in that. My team's incredibly flexible and understanding of my personal dynamics at the moment, managing mum at home, and 2 teenage kids. So if I need to shift a meeting, or if I need to, have a meeting in a car or something like that, this is what makes this possible, and it builds trust in the team. So I think understanding a little bit about your team, where they come from, what their family dynamic is, only helps you strengthen the bonds in that team.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think we've just released a poll and with a couple of questions for everyone that's still online. We'd love it if you can give us some feedback on. There's a couple of questions on that, please. The other one that, and I might close it on that because I'm conscious we're just about to run out of time.
Sure.
Leadership is not a passive thing. I love that. And I heard it in November. And again, it sort of hit me in the face just now when I was listening to the recording. And your thoughts, like, I know you said it, but, just
Yeah.
how
Yep.
important that is.
It is. And look, there are some days where you can't, you sit down and even I think in all levels of leadership, you have days when it's hard and it takes a lot of energy. And some days you just want to phone it in, and that's okay. We're all humans, and we all have other things going on. I mean, I had a day a couple of weeks ago where I just sat here and I thought, I've got so much to do. I don't know what to do. And it's then to take that moment, take that breath, reset, and go, no, I'm going to show up today. I'm going to actively, consciously be here. I'm going to do stuff intentionally and as with purpose, and it helps provide structure to your day. It helps provide a way forward when you get a bit overwhelmed and when you think, there's nothing I can do today that's going to be any good. It's those times where you switch from being passive to active and you step in and you lean in.
I love that. Might then close it on that. Let me just have a look if there's any more. Yeah, there's a couple of questions, admin ones, but there's been, I don't know if you've been seeing a lot of beautiful comments thanking you for sharing your story and for being so frank and open. We say it all the time: if you can't see it, you can't be it, and it's so important for our leaders, especially women, to be sharing their stories and being quite honest. It's hard, like you said. Some days it's harder than the others, but you still step up and you do it, and you're the leader. So, Rebecca, thank you so much for your time today, and thank you for the presentation in November. And we might, if there's any follow-up questions or anything like that, we might drop them to you, and we can do that offline. But yeah, thank you so much, and thank you
Oh, that's
everyone
been my
for
pleasure.
joining us. Yeah,
Thank you
perfect.
very much for the opportunity.
Pleasure. Thank you everyone for joining us. And we've got a couple more recordings from November's Women in Leadership Symposium that we've scheduled into a webinar series. So follow that on our website or through our socials to be able to join that. There was a couple, I think the whole day was fantastic, amazing presentation. So wherever we can bring them to you, we are bringing those to you during this year. Wonderful. Thank you and goodbye.